Good morning to all of you again, and good evening to Annie and Sebastian, who are joining us from Harvard. And thank you for stretching your day into the night to make this work for us. One of the most valuable parts of this conference and others like it is the opportunity to introduce journalists to resources that you can tap to provide context and authority to the reporting. Harvard's Atlas of Economic Complexity is just one of those repositories. The Atlas offers an extraordinary window into the economic dynamics of countries across the globe. And I want to introduce you to the presenters who will be introducing this great resource to you today. Annie White is the Director of Digital Tools at Harvard's Growth Lab, where she oversees the development of web applications that make complex economic research accessible to policymakers and journalists and organizations worldwide. Under her leadership, the lab's portfolio has grown to over 40 applications, including the flagship International Atlas of Economic Complexity and a range of sub-national tools. Annie is also the co-author of the Harvard case study, A User-Centered Design Process for Data-Driven Policymaking. Sebastian Bustos is a senior research fellow at Harvard's Growth Lab. His research interests are the development of the private sector and how governments can solve market failures to accelerate the process. Sebastian holds a BS in Economics and Business Administration from the University of Chile and a Master's in Public Administration and International Development from the Harvard Kennedy School. Before his studies at Harvard, Sebastian served as economic advisor to the Minister of Finance of Chile, focusing on capital markets and tax reforms. So please welcome Annie and Sebastian.
Thank you so much, Kevin, and good morning to everybody. I'm going to get started by sharing my screen today. And hopefully you can all see this. So I'd like to get started today by just telling you a little bit about who the lab is. That will help to make clear why we build tools like the Atlas in the first place. So the Growth Lab is a research lab at Harvard, and we're housed at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. And our goal at the Growth Lab is to uncover the mechanisms behind economic growth and to translate those findings into insights for policymaking across countries, regions, and cities. So we sort of apply our insights all around the world. We have projects in cities, countries, regions all over the world at any given time. One of the things that makes the Growth Lab really unique is that we have in-house software development at the lab. So we're the only research group at the Kennedy School and actually one of very few labs at Harvard that has in-house software development with the group. And we find this to be a really, really useful way to translate insights. And so we have kind of these big three pillars at the lab: academic research, policy research, where Seba sort of sits, and then digital tools, the team that I oversee. And everything from our academic research to policy research ultimately kind of comes as an input to our digital tools. We build our digital tools as public resources, free for use for anyone to use in the world. And everything we learn from those tools being out in the world, it all comes back to us into our research as well. We build all kinds of things at the lab. So not just the Atlas of Economic Complexity. I believe Kevin kindly pointed out that we have over 40 digital tools now in our portfolio. I'll actually share a QR code in just a couple of minutes, and you can dig into those yourselves. But the Atlas is really our flagship tool. We build smaller sort of country-specific data dashboards and even some editorial features as well. I bet some people in the room will be interested in those stories that we build too. Our tools have a wide reach. So we build largely for the policymaking community, but we know there's a big cohort of researchers who use our tools as well, and definitely journalists. We've been featured in all kinds of mainstream media around the world, And we find that the use case for our tools in journalism is really to make a story come to life through data visualization and really strong, reliable data. You'll see a little bit more about what I mean with that in the atlas. So we have users in almost every single country in the world, and millions of new users since the inception of our first tool, the Atlas, back in 2013. For those of you who are interested in exploring a little bit more into our tools, you can find the Atlas and everything else we've built, including software packages, editorial stories, data sets. By scanning the QR code, it'll take you to our Viz Hub and you can take it from there. Before I get into the Atlas, what I'd like to do is pass it over to Sebastian, and he's going to cue up our discussion by explaining a little bit more about how we see the world at the Growth Lab and how some of that vision ends right up at the Atlas. So Sebastian, I am handing it over to you.
So I hope you can see my screen. So for us at the Growth Lab, one of the key questions is the issue of economic growth. So when you think of growth from a long-term perspective, we have the picture that I have in the slide. So what we see there is that essentially for the last 2,000 years, economic growth was nowhere to be seen. The livelihoods of people were very stagnant across countries. And if you look at towards the right-hand side of the slide, you can see that some action starts to happen. And if I zoom in the last 200 years, what you see, what basically you see is that economic growth starts to happen. And we start seeing that there's some divergence in the income per capita across countries and regions in the world. So a key question for us is how to think about what's driving these differences and whether we can replicate the success stories across countries in order to unleash prosperity across cities, regions, and countries. So what is behind this? Is it the accumulation of capital? Is it the way we divide the work? Is it institutions? Is it technology? So at the Growth Lab, basically our working hypothesis is that the driving force behind these differences across countries, it's an issue of technology. So this can be illustrated by the following two pictures that I'm going to show. So what you see on screen is a technology to produce agricultural products. So this is a simple technology that is used across countries. One of the interesting issues about this technology is that you can travel around the world and that you can take a picture like this one almost everywhere. I was thinking about technology. If for those journalists in the room, if you try to think about the technology used in journalism, if you wanted to take a picture of a typewriter, it's something that most probably you will have a hard time finding. Like the last time that I saw a typewriter, I saw it in a museum. As opposed to that example of typewriters, this technology on screen is something that you can see everywhere. But this is also another technology to do agricultural products. So the interesting thing about these two different ways of production is that although they are doing the same, they are doing it with very different types of technology. So what is technology? So we tend to think of technology in many different ways. And like, although capital, institutions, and so on could be replicated across countries or distributed or shipped around and so on, technology is something that is very difficult to diffuse and replicate. But let me be more specific when I talk about technology. What is it that we have in mind when we talk about technology? I think that is a term that tends to be loosely used everywhere. And the reason for that is that the technology has three meanings. The first meaning of technology is that it's something that resides in tools. So for instance, what I have on screen here is a drone. You could think of the tool of your preference, but the key issue about tools is that there's something that you don't need to know how to produce. You don't need to how to repair it or replicate it. It's something that you need access to the tool and you need to know how to use it. This is a first way of thinking about technology. The second way of thinking about technology is about that it resides on codes, formulas, blueprints, or recipes. So you could have like the technology needed to do a building or a airplane and so on by looking at the tools, and that's something that we can in principle we can replicate. So one difference and one thing that I want you to have in mind when we talk about tools is that if the problem of diffusing technology was one of having access to the tools, well, that's something easy to solve because we know that we could ship tools around. We can move productive machines around the world. So the issue that restricts the diffusion of technologies is not necessarily one about tools. What about codes? What about formulas and so on? Well, we know that we can diffuse knowledge, for instance, with the help of internet. And if you wanted, for instance, to know how to do an airplane, how to make an airplane, well, you have mostly all the science and all the knowledge that you need on Wikipedia. It's just an issue of reading the articles, and there you have all the science, all the technology needed for flying for making an airplane. Well, but I said that there's three forms of technologies, and so far I have only discussed two. So to explain the third one, I'm going to ask you to think of what would you do if your tooth hurts. Okay? So based on what I was describing, what would you do? So based on what I was saying, it's very simple. What you need to do is you go to Wikipedia, you read the article about endodontic therapy, and voila, that's it. So at most, you need the help from your significant other to perform something that you will direct after having read the article, and that's all you need. Obviously, this is not true. If your tooth hurt, what do? You go to a dentist. So why is it? So the dentist will use some tools, he will use some knowledge, but why is it in reality that you use a dentist and you don't go to the internet and perform the procedure yourself? It's because there's something that the dentist has been trained of. He has a lot of experience in using properly the tools, using all the knowledge and so on to perform this operation. And that's something that we call know-how. So that's the third component of what makes technology so hard to diffuse. As I said before, if it was an issue about tools, those can be shipped. If it was an issue about knowledge, we have all of the knowledge in scientific articles, Wikipedia, and so on. Like all of the things has been written about. So the main issue that restricts this flow of knowledge across countries and explains the differences of productivity and at the end of prosperity across regions and countries is knowledge. So why is it knowledge or know-how so difficult to acquire? Again, we can use an example. Let's say that you wanted to play tennis or improve the tennis that you are currently doing. So, well, you can go and talk about it with Rafa Nadal, who is here on the screen. So, although he may be one of the best players in history, I can bet you that a conversation with Rafa Nadal is very likely, or very unlikely, sorry, to improve your tennis. So one of the issues is that Rafa Nadal has been playing for years. Well, he just retired, but he played for many years. And most likely, he does what he does because he has been training, but it's something that he does when he goes into the court. He doesn't think about exactly what he needs to do in each instance. He has been embedding this know-how, and he just performs it. And if you wanted to ask him what is the rational thing that you've been doing when you use your backhand or your his serve, probably he wouldn't be able to transmit what is the know-how that he contains, and therefore it will be very unlikely that your tennis will improve because of this, because of that conversation. So what about other forms of know-how? What about other services or products? So we can think of other services like, for instance, the service that we get when we travel in an airplane. So we could think that this gentleman on slide, it's basically the key component, and the main know-how needed to take you from one part in the world to another country in an airplane. And the reality is that that's a poor understanding of what this technology is about, because this particular service, it's actually embedded in a much larger network of different productive processes and technologies for which you need a larger team of professionals that are providing different services, from flight attendants to security to the workers that maintain the airplanes, control, and so on. So based on this thing, we are moving up a layer, and we are realizing that the technology and the importance about knowledge or technology diffusion is not only about knowledge that can be performed by one person, but it's actually something more collaborative. And it is what we called collective know-how. That is what is needed, all the competences that are needed to perform a larger, to be able to take advantage of different capabilities and produce more complex products and services. So again, just to illustrate this issue, we can think of a couple of examples. So for instance, if you wanted to think about productive processes that are simple, I can show you the case of a single family that makes most of the products that they consume. And we have on screen right now this family in Ecuador. And what you see is that they are basically showing all of the products that they are able to produce. They have all of the knowledge needed to produce this thing. This is a very basically a self-sufficient family that knows to do everything that they need to survive. In contrast, there's no family that can produce the products that I have here. There's no family that has all of the knowledge and all of the pieces needed to produce these electronic products on screen. And if we continue the idea and we extend it to other processes, I can argue that there are no firms and no single firms and no single countries that they can produce an airplane like the Boeing 787 that I have on screen. I don't know if you can see the different pieces that are like the breakdown of the different pieces that I have on screen, but basically they are highlighting that different pieces of the airplane are done by very different firms, and these firms are located in different parts of the world. So you can see that these complex products need a lot. They need to collaborate with the teams that hold knowledge in different parts of the productive space. So just to make the point more clear, I want you also to think that this issue about the differences between these products and the productive processes behind them, it's not an issue of scale. So, for instance, what I have here is on screen is a poultry factory, and if you see, there's many different workers, but essentially all of the workers are performing the same task. If you were to move these workers around, probably nothing will happen to the productive process that they are performing. The output will remain the same. However, there are other productive processes in which that's not true. If you were to move people in the following productive processes in an orchestra, I will bet that you will be able to hear the difference. If one piece of this team of workers was missing, or where you were to shuffle around the instruments, the tools that they are using to perform their production, you will notice the difference, and probably the final output will be not the same. So another way of trying to formalize the idea and the framework that we have in mind when we think about growth, and we try to explain the world and advise cities, regions, and countries how to move forward, we can think about the Scrabble theory of economic development, where I'm going to do a couple of analogies, and I hope they remain simple and you can track the basic idea. So we can capture the idea of specialization of tasks and the capabilities needed to produce different products with the following analogy. Let's assume that products are like words. I assume, by the way, that most of you have seen or know about the Scrabble game, where the idea is that you have different letters that are going to be the productive capabilities or the know-how needed to ensemble different words that are going to be like products. So if you had only one letter, you will be able to do in English only one word, the letter or the word A. But if I add to this set a couple of letters, for instance, these 3 letters, A, C, T, you will be able to do 4 words that are made of 3 different letters. Okay, so here the analogy is going to be that the longer the word, the more complex it is because it's using different capabilities. So if I continue with the analogy and I add one more letter, let's say now we add the letter R, so we have R-A-C-T. Now you can do 4 words, and the interesting thing is that now you can do 4-letter words. You can do so. If we can continue with this analogy and we add, let's say, 10 letters, according to the Scrabble website, you will be able to do 595 different words. And the interesting thing is that some of those words that you will be able to put together are going to be 10-letter words that are like more complex in this analogy. So one of the things that we do at the Growth Lab is we try to map the world using data, and we try to put this analogy into action. So one of the things that we have done is we have collected data across countries, across years, and across products to try to describe what we observe in the world. Although we cannot observe the individual letters, we can observe the different words that are made across countries, meaning the products that are being done across countries. So we can observe how long are these words, which we are going to interpret as how rare, like it's some countries are able to do these longer words. And a simple figure that summarizes what we have in mind is what I'm going to show next. That is the relationship between the diversification and the ubiquity of countries. So what I have in the horizontal axis is the diversification, how diversified are the productive baskets, the production baskets of different countries. And what we have in the vertical axis is how ubiquitous, how rare, how sophisticated are the different products. So I don't know if you are able to see the labels that we have on screen, but at the bottom right, we have the most diverse countries that are able to produce products that are very unique, products that only a few other countries are able to make. So we have at the bottom left countries like the USA, Japan, China, Australia, Korea, and so on. On the other side of the equation, we have at the top left countries that produce only a handful of products. However, those products tend to be produced only by a lot of countries. So those are very ubiquitous products. So what countries we observed in the top left? We see countries like Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Moldova, and so on. So these are countries that tend to be also poor. So in essence, what we see in the world is that there's something about production that it tends to be difficult, and we think that explains the differences in income that we observe in the world. So just to go back to how we started this presentation, let me go back to the initial question that we were asking about the differential productive processes for basically the same output. So what explains the differences in productivity of these two productive processes? Back again, basically they are trying to produce the same product, an agricultural output. And let's ask the question about who contains or who has more knowledge. So one approach is just to try to think of what do these two persons in the left and the right, they know about the productive processes that they are performing. So one approach, when we think about the gentleman to the left, is that, well, most probably he knows how to produce his tools. It's very likely that he knows about fertilizers. Probably in some cases, you could argue that in some parts of the world related to this productive process, he knows how to provide his own clothing, to take care of the animals, and so on. So there's a lot of knowledge that this gentleman contains. On the right hand side, the driver it's basically behind that windshield. I will argue that he knows how to drive the harvester, but most probably he doesn't know how to provide the fuel needed. Most probably he doesn't know how to repair this harvester. So why is it then? So if we're talking about knowledge, why is it then that the gentleman towards the right, he's so much productive performing this productive process? So we believe that the answer to this question is related to the fact that the gentleman to the right, he may be a simple letter. He may know individually only a small amount of knowledge, but that's knowledge, it's a key component in a much larger world. It's a complementary to all of these tools that he's using, and therefore, by relying on this collective knowledge, he's able to be much more productive. He's able to produce much more output than the productive process and the gentleman at the left side of the screen. So one of the things that we've been doing at the Growth Lab is try to map these capabilities with data. I already showed a snapshot. Another way of understanding what is this shared knowledge and what are the things that that countries can produce is by trying to observe patterns in the data. So one of the things that we've done is try to understand what are products that tend to be produced together. The key underlying assumption behind this idea is that what we observe being done together is tightly connected, not because of capital, not because of institutions. In most cases, it's because there's something about the knowledge that can be redeployed from one productive process to the other, and that's why these products tend to be produced together. Following this logic, we have mapped what we see as the productive process of the world, and that's what we have visualized as the productive space, the product space, sorry. So the product space is this way of thinking about how these products tend to be done together. So in this slide, products are the nodes. These nodes are proportional to world trade. So the larger the node, the more important is that the product in trade across countries. So what do we observe is the following. At the left, we have the tight cluster of textiles and garments. Next, we have a cluster of foodstuff and tropical agriculture. Then we have the cluster of transport vehicles, metals, electronics. We have in purple here the cluster of chemicals. And one of the things that it's interesting about this visualization is that there are patterns that emerge, like the fact that oil and some natural resources are in the periphery. So one interesting fact about the product space is that it helps us to understand the pattern of diversification and how countries move in the productive process by moving from one product or one cluster to others. So this evolution through the product space, it's not something random. Countries tend to move slowly from one productive process to the other, based on the idea that if you know how to do one product that uses, for instance, a lot of engineers, then other products that they use the same knowledge, the same resources, are in your adjacent possible, and therefore is something that becomes more likely to be produced in your country. So one of the things that we've done, and that's something that Annie will discuss in a bit, is that you can visualize through this map the productive process and how different countries looked over time. So just to give you an idea, I'm going to show you a very successful case, that is the one of Vietnam. So as you know, Vietnam by the late 2020s, it's a country that has been very successful in conquering the textile and the garment cluster. They do some food stuff, and as well, they have been very successful in later years in jumping into the electronic cluster. And there's many different firms that have opened shop in Vietnam. The interesting fact is that this was not the case even 20 years ago. So if you go back in time, based on this visualization, we see a picture that was very different. They had some process, some production, competitive production in natural resources and textiles. And this thing that they have done successfully into conquering the electronics and some machinery clusters is something that they have been they did slowly over time, moving into what was in their adjacent possible. Just to contrast the success story of Vietnam in the late 2000s, I have the case of Saudi Arabia. If you look at the case of Saudi Arabia through the lens of this the product space, you see that they have presence mostly in the case of in the cluster of natural resources, and the rest of the product space is very empty. They don't have much presence in textiles. They don't have much presence in machinery, that is the core of the product space. They don't have almost any presence in the electronic cluster, that is this cluster at the bottom left. And in the case of chemicals, they have a few products, but in essence, the product space of Saudi Arabia is very empty, and therefore our way of looking at the productive process and what they could do, it's very grim. Our prospects is that for them to move into new products, it's going to be very difficult because there's almost nothing in the adjacent possible, and that collective knowledge, that the redeployment of resources and knowledge that the other countries could do, is something that it will be very difficult for a case like Saudi Arabia. So based on these ideas and the combination of how diverse are countries, how ubiquitous are the productive baskets of what they are able to export to the world, one of the things that we've been computing is an index of how complex are the different economies. So basically, it's a way of not only taking into account how diverse, how many different things you're able to perform, like in the analogy of the Scrabble theory, but also how long are these words, how difficult or rare are them to be observed in the data. And based on this idea, we have put together this index of economic complexity. The map of the world, according to this index, is colored by shows in blue the economies that are more complex. So you have at the top countries like Japan, Germany, and so on. And in red, we have the countries that are less complex, which are like basically countries in South America and in Africa. So one of the things that we've done to show that this is a good metric about what could be the prospects of countries in the world is to show how it correlates with the income per capita. And what we observe in the data is that this index of economic complexity, again, that uses nothing about institutions, nothing about capital, nothing about the accumulation of resources. It's just let me know what are you able to produce and how ubiquitous those products are, and I can tell you basically what are the prospects of income for your country. And as you can see, the location of countries in this scatter plot doesn't align correct, like tight, completely over the line of the regression line. Some some countries are above the line and some countries are at the below the line. And basically what we argue, and we have shown in different papers, is that these deviations from the trend are what is informative about future economic growth. And as you can see, for instance, we have countries above the trend, like Greece, that is a country that for the last 20 years has been in trouble. Our take on the case of Greece is that they are too rich for what they are able to produce. But on the other hand, we have countries below the regression line, like the Philippines or also India. There are countries that in the last decades, they have been doing great. They are growing fast. And we believe that those are countries that are, in essence, more complex than the current income that they have. And that's why the prospect that we see for those countries is great. We think that those countries are going to grow in the future. So that's a little bit of a snapshot of what we do at the Growth Lab, how we see the world. And I already gave you some hints of why we are using data intensively to map these productive processes. Also, what are the capabilities of countries? And at the end, to have like an idea of what are the prospects of these countries for the future. So, Annie, I'm handing it back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Seba. Seba described many of the ideas and themes that motivate our work at the lab. And so it's the job of the software development team here at the lab to translate that research into practical tools that folks just like you all can use in your work and apply into some of your own research. And so that's where the Atlas comes in. So we're going to take a bit of time to tour the Atlas and learn about the insights you can pull from this tool and some of the things we're all able to learn. And I hope that we can even spare a few minutes as well at the end for some questions too. So when you get to the Atlas of Economic Complexity, you are presented with a few ways to get into the tool. So if we come up here to our top navigation, we see Explore and Countries and Data. I think one of the best ways to start in the tool is with Explore. And the Explore section of the Atlas is almost like a choose your own adventure. And right away, what you'll see is something Seba pointed out at the beginning of his presentation, which is that we put data visualization front and center in our tools. And we think that customizable, interactive data visualization is one of the best ways to get at some of the interesting information that we can pull from a massive data set. So what is that data set? Well, the Atlas's main source of data is Comtrade trade data. I bet that's a data set many of you are familiar with. And what you'll notice right away is that the Atlas actually doesn't go up to present year, and it certainly does not account for minute by minute or month by month trade data. And one of the reasons for that is because the Atlas includes bilateral data. So right now we're looking at the country of Ghana. So what did Ghana export in 2023? And we can look at something like what did Ghana export we'll choose a neighboring country perhaps. We'll choose a nearby country. And so this bilateral relationship that exists here, whether it's importer to exporter, exporter to importer, that relationship exists between every pair of countries in the world. So the Atlas covers every single country in the world by region, so you can explore it at all different types of aggregation. And because we need that bilateral relationship, it means that we have to wait for just about every single country in the world to report its trade data. And that can take anywhere from 12 to 16 to 18 months. So we think that lag in the updatedness of the tool is worth it because it allows us to provide this relationship in the tool. Some of you Comtrade experts will look at this tool and say, hey, that's not exactly the value that Comtrade provides when I download the data. And that's because we actually clean the Comtrade data before we put it in the tool. That cleaning process I won't get into now. It is actually a process that was designed and shepherded by Sebastian Bustos, joining us today. And we have lots of research coming out soon detailing that process. Today, we won't get into it, but it does explain why the values in the atlas don't perfectly align with the raw data that you might download from Comtrade. So I'm going to come back up here and choose a different country for the purpose of today's session. Why not choose Singapore? And so here we're looking at what did Singapore export in 2023. And if we come down here, we can see that this tree map is colored by sectors. And so sure enough, it's no surprise that a lot of Singapore's exports are indeed services. I might come into this tree map and say, hey, I'm only interested in what Singapore exported besides its services. So take that out and I can hide that. And we see that the tree map animates to represent that. And I might say it's only services that I'm interested in, and I can keep those and remove everything else. One of the great things about this bilateral relationship is that I can toggle back and forth between it. So what did Singapore import from the world in 2023? And as I showed before, I can always pick a trade partner as well and look at that bilateral relationship. The tool goes back as far as 1962, and it depends on the data classification that you're looking at. So if I come into settings here, the default value will always be that we're looking at HS92 at the 4-digit level. But I might come in here and say, I want way less granularity than 4-digit. I'm sort of interested in the broader strokes of the trade data for this country, in which case I would just look at the 1-digit level. And I might also be interested in super granular data for Singapore, and I can come down here to the 6-digit level. So we always provide people with lots of ways and settings to customize the data visualization and then come back to default settings if you find yourself lost. The other flip side of this view is we're looking at what did a country export or import in a given year, but we can also look at the location side of that. So where did I send my export and imports in a particular year? So where did Singapore export its products to? Probably no surprise if I bump this up to the regional level, most of those exports, or a lot of them, went to other Asian countries. And I can come in here and get a little bit more granular down to the country again and see that here. So it's good to toggle back and forth between different products and locations. If you're hovering here and you notice a particular country, so where did Singapore export all its products to? China is, of course, one of those countries. If I click, the tooltip will anchor itself there. And what products did Singapore export to China? This is just a little helper tooltip, and it'll teach me what that is there. So what did Singapore export to China in 2023? Okay, if you're interested in that historical view, you can come back and say, okay, how did that look different perhaps in 1995? It actually looked quite a bit different. Okay, so we can come over here and actually see all kinds of ways to represent this picture of a country's imports and exports. And what we're really getting down to here is in the atlas, we use that Comtrade data or export and import data almost as a proxy for what a country is capable of doing. The idea here being that if you can produce and manufacture and export a product in your country, it must mean you have those capabilities to do so. And that starts to form this representation of the know-how that exists in a country and perhaps the capabilities and opportunities that are available next. So we start getting a sense of what's available, the capabilities and know-how that are available in Singapore. We can see that put a different way on a trade map. So when we look at this global view here, Singapore is just small enough that we probably can't see it unless we really zoom in on this map. I'll choose a slightly bigger country to make my point. If we choose Canada, for example, we'll see this big highlighted mass here in yellow. Canada is our selected country. And what this shows is just a heat map of Canadian exports. So where did Canada export all its products to in 1995? The darkest countries represent the highest trade volume. And we can bring this back up to the most recent year in the tool. Not much changes, actually. The United States is, of course, its highest volume trading partner. One of the great things as well in the Atlas is we can see data over time. We like this view a lot. So here is that one-digit view again of Canadian exports from 1995 to 2023, and those exports slowly grow over time. And once again, what's really great about this is that we can isolate and hide different sectors too. So I might come in here and say it's really only the machinery sector I'm interested in over time, and I can isolate that here. I should point out, and I bet this is a group that this matters for, you can come in here and do different downloads as well. So if you come in here, you can download any image that you're seeing, and you can also download the data associated with the graph that you're looking at. Downloading data is a very important part of this tool, and I'll show you a different way of doing that at the end. We can also come in here and look at market share. So now we're still looking at Canada, and this is looking at Canada's global market share by sector over time. So once again, we're starting at 1995, and here is all 9 of those sectors and their global market share of trade over time. And you can, once again, come in here and see how that looks. These graphs tend to readjust themselves if we come in here and get rid of minerals, for example, or vehicles. This graph will represent itself in a different way. Seba talked about the product space, and this is where we get into a little bit more of our economic complexity data visualizations. So the product space is a way for us to tell 2 things. It's sort of like this nice bird's eye view of a country's economy. So now we're looking at Canadian exports in a different way. So here's the product space where every node represents a product. So if you recall, if we were back here on the tree map, what we were looking at was every export is sort of one little rectangle in here. In the product space, every export is a node, or every product is a node. If the country has sort of a high presence or a high volume of that export, it takes on a color, and that color is associated with these clusters down here. If it's gray, it means that the country has little to no activity in that export. So it's no surprise, perhaps, for Canada that there's lots of export activity in agricultural goods, minerals, metalworking, and machinery. And these nodes really cluster together. We can actually zoom in a little bit here. When I hover on a node in the product space, what it does is reveal these lines of connection. And these lines show me the very next products or the nearby products that share a similar know-how to what I already know how to do. So we know there's lots of car manufacturing that happens in Canada. And so we show that Canada has high export volume in cars, in motor vehicles, even in spark ignition and reciprocating internal combustion piston engines. But this ring chart also shows products that are nearby or share the same know-how as what I already know how to do, but I don't have a high export volume in those products. And so in the Atlas, what we think of those as are sort of the next opportunity or the adjacent possible opportunities for my country. And so for Canada, that might be vehicle bodies, text articles, and so on. We can go back in. I'll choose another node just to make the point even further. So if we come in here, we know that there's some activity in Canada happening around soybean production, corn, sunflower seeds, flowers of oil seeds represent adjacent possibilities for the country. So we don't think that a country necessarily develops by randomly choosing opportunities to go into next, or to pick things that are sort of far away from what it already knows how to do. It tends to be the case that countries grow and enhance their capabilities and their complexity by hopping one hop away, another hop away to the nodes that are nearby to what it already knows how to do. We present this in finally another way. Oh, and I should point out before we move on, for those of you who are using the product space for the first time, we tried to put in here a tutorial that takes you through very quickly the concept of the product space, its use and its purpose, and how to navigate through it. So that's always available up here. We present opportunity, a country's opportunity, in one final way here in the feasibility graph. Just quickly to point out what this looks like. Once again, these circles or these nodes are products, and these represent the opportunities for, once again, we're looking at Canada. And so what we're looking at here is we want to choose opportunities for the country in terms of production opportunities that are nearby to what I already know how to do and that have a high complexity. And so those tend to be the products that are above this ECI, or this economic complexity line, over up here in the left-hand quadrant. And so for Canada, that might represent serums and vaccines, that might represent packaged medicine, and so on. So I bet if we went back to the product space, we would see that Canada's already doing some things in chemicals, and that some of these more medically based chemical activities are nearby to what it already knows how to do. Okay. One of the things we heard actually from a large part from the journalist community over the years is, can you just tell me the story of my country's complexity? What you can tell from, I think, from using the Explore section of the Atlas is it's really a choose your own adventure that has all kinds of permutations. But what we've heard from people over the years is, can you just tell us the story of our country with a beginning, a middle, and an end? And so that's why we built country profiles. So country profiles take so much of what we pulled over and what we can explore on the Explore side of the Atlas and puts it in more of a narrative structure. We do not cover every single country in the world. For this section, we cover a subset of 144 countries, and that's just because we need very, very reliable data to pull together a country profile. So I'll come back to Singapore again for the purpose of this demonstration. And so here what we're trying to do is tell the story of Singapore's economic complexity. We won't have time to go through absolutely each section of it, but what you can see is it pulls many of the themes from the Explore section and starts to build out that story. Its complexity of its export basket, where growth is coming from inside of that export basket. We saw this market share graph. Here it is for Singapore. As Singapore is building and growing, which new products is it introducing into its export basket? We talked about the product space. This is what it looks like for Singapore. We recommend a strategic approach when it comes to building policy. And so we recommend that Singapore take on a technological frontier approach. And then we get into potential growth opportunities as well. The last thing I'll show you in terms of country analysis is our country complexity rankings. So every year at the lab, we rank 144 countries according to their economic complexity. If you want to learn more about how we do this, we provide lots of information in the tool. But for now, I'll just give you a tour of what that page looks like. Here is all of those 144 countries over time. And you can see that how that ECI ranking changes and adapts over time, depending on what's happening in the country, various policy mechanisms, and so on. And again, I'll try to find Singapore in here. I can search for it. And here is Singapore's complexity right at the top in the #1 spot. So it represents the most complex country up till 2023. And we can come down here and see a little bit more variability depending on the country we're looking at. Here's Oman, Iran, lots of variability, Georgia, and so on. For those of you who want a little bit more of a comparison tool, you can come in here and add various countries that you want to see side by side. So here we have Mexico, USA, India, Algeria. Maybe I'm going to add Belgium for a point of comparison. Maybe I'll add Brazil for a point of comparison. And you can, of course, play around with the years as well. And finally, for those of you who just like a plain table, that is sortable by column, you can find all of that information here, including how that has changed over the years. The last thing I think is really important to point out is that all of the data in the Atlas you can download for free and for your own use. So if you come to the data downloads page, you can come in here and sort what you want to see and certainly filter as well. So you might come in here and say, look, it's only HS92 that I care about. and maybe I only want to see products at the 4-digit level. There are your data sets, and you can download those freely. Okay, so I realize we're right at the hour. Maybe I'll stop there. I'm happy to take questions if we have time, and maybe I'll pass it over to Kevin.
Hi, good morning. Katya Dimitrieva from Bloomberg News. Really appreciate you walking through all that data. Super helpful in reporting. One question I had is there a way to show how complexity for an economy has changed over time? So you showed the map where it's quite static. I would guess it's for 2023 data, but is there a way to show, maybe using the same colors as a heat map, how, just to find out which economies are growing more complex at the fastest rate or a faster rate than others? And also, have you ever seen an economy go backwards, like grow less complex? And what kind of caused that? And finally, geographically, is there a way to show how geographically trade has changed for a certain economy? So you showed one of the last slides was like a bubble, that you can click into, and then it shows other products that they import and export or are related. Is it possible to show that geographically so that, for example, Vietnam, it would show a clear movement of like Chinese companies, closer relations with Chinese companies in the past 5 years, let's say. So I hope that's not too in the weeds.
Okay, I'm going to take the first part, then I'll probably hand it to Seba for the second, then we'll try for the third. So in terms of seeing economic complexity over time, this is the best way to do it. This shows starting at the year 2000 to 2023, with each of these little bars sort of being the ranking for that year. What this doesn't show you, and I think you were also alluding to in your question, is acceleration. So how quickly is a country accelerating towards greater economic complexity? I don't think that's really what this is intended to communicate, but it does just show change over time. And so does this as well. It just gives you the opportunity to compare different countries side by side, and you can pick whatever countries matter to you to compare. In terms of countries moving backwards, yes, that does happen. I bet Seba might have a couple of examples.
Yeah. So I'm from Chile, so I can tell you that there's a couple of countries in South America that have moved back, and our neighbors, Argentina, is like a classical example of a country that has had a better past, and the complexity, and therefore the complexity, the proactive knowledge that they have. It's today worse than it was 20 years ago. One thing that I have to say about the measure is that in essence, this is a relative index. What basically we are combining is information about how diverse are countries and how ubiquitous are the products that they are able to make, and therefore everything is sort of relative to what others are doing, and therefore this is not an absolute idea of how fast they could grow. It's basically having an idea of how better than the other countries a country could do, and how they are performing. You said you had a question at the end about that I didn't completely get. I think that it was something about bilateral trade across countries. Could you repeat that part of the question?
Yeah, I'm wondering if there's a way to show, I guess, geographically, and perhaps this is not what the tool is meant to do, but the whole idea, like when you had the blocks for each country and showing bilateral trade, I guess it would be something that shows how those blocks have changed over time. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
trying to think of how to explain. Yeah.
So I don't know while I answer whether you, Annie, could pull out the part of the tool. So those, what you referred as blocks, are what we call the tree maps. Those tree maps basically represent, in terms of area, the trade that the countries are, the value that they are either exporting or importing. And exactly as you said, you could build your own adventure, as Annie said before. You could show the value in terms of either the products or in terms of destinations, if you are thinking of exports. And one of the possible destinations, I believe it is regions. No, Annie?
Yeah.
So if you wanted to, for instance, show what the UK, that is what Annie has on screen, what the UK is exporting, you could focus on a particular country as a destination, or you could also think of a region like Eastern Africa, that is what Annie has on screen. So if you wanted to see, for instance, what's the evolution of that thing over time, you could basically take that visualization and compare it to either other region or the same destination region over time. You could compare it to a different year, and in that way you could see whether the trade it's moving up or down, or changing its composition.
You can also use just the overtime graph and select your year ranges, and that'll give you that overtime view.
Okay. Hello, Annie and Sebastian. Thank you so much for your presentation. My name is Nilanta Ilangomu. I'm from Sri Lanka, representing Sri Lanka Guardian. And my question is, how do you verify your data, and what are the main sources that you are relying on, and how can you just accountable the money laundering and other underhand businesses, like example like gold in Sudan, and most of the gold is just go to some of the countries in West Asia and selling off, and no one knows what's happening there. And so that's basically, I just wanted to verify that.
Yeah.
Seba, do you take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great question. So there's a lot of reasons why trade data may be unreliable. Some countries do not want to report all of the data. Some countries prefer to hide some of their destinations or from where they are importing stuff. So the issue of errors or data quality is pervasive in trade data statistics. The great thing about trade data, and the trick that we use to clean the data and improve it, is the fact that in theory, every flow of data or of a value, it's reported twice. It's reported ideally by the exporter, and it's also reported by the importer. Okay, so that's in theory how trade data works. In cases where we don't observe that the data matches, what we use is basically a method that we have developed to basically have our own take on what data flow is more reliable based on what we observe from the different parties reporting the data. So it's funny that you asked that question, because we're finishing that paper right now. So actually tomorrow we have the last meeting to submit that paper to a academic journal. And basically what we show and we explain is how we are basically mirroring what the different trade partners are reporting. We combine that data, and we try to validate it. There's many countries in the world for which unless you engage in something that as I described, you wouldn't have any idea of what is the breakdown of what they are reporting. There's or what they are exporting, sorry, or trading in general. There's many sources of data for total exports or total imports, but basically using Comtrade's data and the method that I basically described in a very general idea. That's how we are able to provide the breakdown of what country is exporting what and to which destination. It's for many of the countries in Africa. The only way we are all able to observe, their production is based on this approach. Yeah.
I'd like to ask, how is the complexity index affected by countries which are basically assemblers? They do not, let's give you an example. So you provided Vietnam as an example. Vietnam assembles computers. They do not manufacture either the active or the passive components. But I would assume, because they export a computer, that you would consider them a country that has a relatively complex community or economy. How do you put that in proper perspective?
Yeah, great question. So the first thing is that we don't assume that the countries export what we will call a complex product like a computer just because we observe, a given value being exported, elsewhere. So the first thing is that we try our take of whether a country produces something competitively. It's by a relative term that it's in the literature is called the revealed comparative advantage. That basically is an index that tries to measure whether what a country is exporting is has a relative size that is meaningful enough. So we wouldn't say that, let's say, my home country, Chile, by exporting a couple of $1 million of cars to Argentina will be a significant producer of cars. So there's a relative threshold that they have to surpass for us to say that Chile, Vietnam, whatever country that you have in mind, they are actually exporting and being able to compete in the world in a given product or market. That's the first thing. The second thing is that, as you are saying, some countries are going to start producing, some products, moving through the product space, and at some point they will be able to get into more competitive or more complex products. What we observe in the data is that there's a pattern that has been sort of documented in the applied development literature. That is that it's very often the case that the countries first start with the textiles, they move into garments. That is a more complex product that they required more trained workers, and I don't know exactly whether there's something about the dexterity of these workers, the training that they've been getting at these factories, putting together garments and so on, that they sort of like the same, is a very similar productive process, what is needed to assemble things, as you were describing. Maybe you are importing some intermediate inputs from other countries, surrounding countries, but you are putting them together in a factory that is a process that is actually similar in some way to producing garments. I have to say that a couple of years ago, we actually visited the industrial parks that are surrounding Hanoi, and it was very interesting that this thing that we have observed in the data is something that we were able to discuss with the managers that they were running some of the facilities that you find towards the south of Hanoi, and like as I was describing, some of the way of recruiting workers was actually targeting women that had worked before in these garment operations, and as like one thing that you observe in the data and the way we present it is that at some point it's often the case that first you ensemble these electronic products or machinery, and at some point you start sourcing some of the intermediate inputs locally, and that's how you acquire and from a supply chain perspective you sort of complete the supply chain by jumping on into the other intermediate inputs and completing the productive processes at home. A little bit of that thing, I think, has been going on in Vietnam, and that's why they've been moving up the ladder in terms of complexity. Not only by ensembling simple stuff, but they have been increasing the complexity of what they do.
Well, I think we're going to have to leave it there, but I want to thank you for introducing the group to this great tool that I hope everybody will be anxious to use. And the most important word that you uttered among everything else is that it's free. and so everybody can take advantage. So please join me in thanking Annie and Sebastian for a great presentation.